You sit before a blank page, pencil in hand, staring at the mess of lines and eraser smudges left behind by a dozen failed attempts. You had a vision once, a world teeming with life, with ancient kingdoms and bustling trade routes, with mountains that divided empires and rivers that shaped civilizations. But every time you tried to draw it right, doubt crept in. Was this the right shape? Would those mountains really go there? Should the rivers flow differently? And again, you crumpled the page and started over. You weren't just making a map. You were building a world, and if the foundation is weak, how can the world feel real? If this sounds familiar, you're not alone. Many aspiring fantasy mapmakers find themselves trapped in an endless cycle of redrawing, unable to commit to a world shape that feels right. But the key to breaking free isn't just about learning how to sketch coastlines or shade mountains. It's about understanding why the world formed the way it did, where cities naturally emerge, and how geography shapes the cultures that live there. So let's take a step back from the page and talk about the foundations of fantasy mapmaking. Hello adventurers, and welcome back to the Red Quills. Today we're tackling the most intimidating part of fantasy cartography, starting the map. If you've ever stared at a blank page overwhelmed by the literally infinite possibilities before you, wondering where to begin, then this is the video for you. We're talking about sketching, how to lay the groundwork for your fantasy world by determining the shape of continents, the relationship between coastlines, mountains, and rivers, and the necessary additions to make the map functional, like the borders and title and legends. And most importantly, we'll explore how to make it all look natural and real, because a world that looks right feels right. We'll also take a look at history, how maps evolved from medieval guesswork to a more detailed, precise art form that we know today, and what we can learn from the way that ancient map makers filled in the blanks of their world with what they expected to find. And as always, you can download the map today from our Patreon. Instead of the one that I'm currently working on, which is a commission, you can download a map of the continent from the world of the Witcher books and games. If you want feedback on your own sketches, you can join the ever-growing community on Discord. And if you're looking for a custom fantasy map, you can use these tutorials to make your own, or you can get in contact with me. So let's dive in and start fresh. One of the first steps in creating a compelling fantasy map is deciding the shape of your world. The landmass shape sets the stage for everything: climate, cultures, trade routes, and conflict. Let's look at a few famous maps, both historical and fictional, that can inspire different approaches. So let's call the first the Pangea approach. Some worlds start as a single massive continent, like Pangea, the supercontinent of Earth's prehistoric past. While our world eventually splits into the continents that we know today, a similar structure can be used for a fantasy setting where all civilizations originate from a single vast landmass. Like Tolkien's Middle-earth, though not quite a supercontinent, follows a similar philosophy. It's got a large continuous landmass which fosters many sprawling civilizations, overland migrations, and deep historical connections between cultures. From the elves who awakened in the far east to the more recent kingdoms of men and Numenor in the west, you can find a great deal of different civilizations that have altered one another's paths through history, and all of them began on the same enormous continent. If you want a world shaped by ancient cultures, by great migrations and overland conquest, a Pangea-like structure is a great approach. Another one of the options that you have is the archipelago approach. For instance, something like Japan or Earthsea from the Ursula K. Le Guin series. On the other end of the spectrum, some worlds are made up of scattered islands instead of vast continents. Japan, for instance, has a historical isolation and a reliance on the sea for trade and warfare, and it serves as an excellent real-world example of how an archipelago influences culture. You can also look to other ancient cultures like Greece and the Mediterranean to see how that seafaring approach to life will shape trade, culture, and warfare. Another option is to have a rift continent. It's similar to the idea of a Pangea continent, but has a vast dividing line down the middle. In our own history, Africa has the Great Rift Valley. And in fiction, Mark Lawrence's Broken Empire takes the idea and applies it to fantasy. Some land masses are shaped not by unity, but by division. The Great Rift Valley in Africa is an example of how tectonic activity can split a continent. It can create these deep lakes and mountain ranges and drastic geological shifts. And in fiction, you can take this idea and apply it to fantasy. You can depict a world fractured by an ancient cataclysm, where nations are isolated by these rugged landscapes. So a rift-style continent can make travel difficult. It can encourage regional diversity and give rise to isolated kingdoms that develop unique cultures. Moving on, you can have a peninsular world. Europe, though we don't tend to think of it in this way, is just one enormous peninsula. It is a large landmass, but very, very small on the scale of continents. It has many peninsulas of its own, any inlets and natural borders. It's shaped thousands of years of conflict and cultural evolution because of how crammed it is with geological features. And you can see this in fiction as well. For instance, George R. R. Martin's Westeros takes a similar approach, a long, narrow landmass which is defined by natural barriers. It leads to distinct regional cultures like Dawn and the North and the world beyond the Wall. It has political rivalries that are separated by natural barriers, trade hubs in these vast, gentle, rich valleys. And if you want a world that is filled with warring kingdoms and regional politics and diverse environments within a single landmass, a peninsular structure is a very strong choice. The vast array of different environments allows for many different industries, trades, and goods to crop up within one small area. And last of all, and one of the more exotic choices, is having a ring continent. In our own world, the closest thing you can have is the Indian Ocean, a vast sea which is surrounded by land masses. Some worlds will take on this sort of circular or enclosed shape which forms a natural barrier that impacts trade and movement. The Indian Ocean is surrounded by Africa, Asia, and Australia. It's historically been a hub of maritime trade. While the science fiction worlds of, for instance, Halo, feature artificial ring worlds that enclose entire ecosystem. A ring-shaped landmass can create a unique geographical challenge. It encourages this sort of centralized civilizations while still promoting movement and travel and trade. It fosters a highly specialized economy in different sections of the world. Having something as grand as a ring continent as well also implies the intervention of powers far beyond our own understanding. Halo is an excellent metric for this because the presence of advanced technology implies forces and powers beyond our understanding and control. And in your own worlds, that can be reflected in the powers of the gods, deities, or superhumans. Each of these world shapes will encourage a different style of storytelling, from these overland empires to seafaring nations. So when you're designing your own fantasy world, you've got to think about the type of adventures that you want to take place within it. Your landmass could shape the story just as much as your characters do. So think about what kind of story you're telling. Is it a vast continent filled with these unexplored wilds at the beginning of a world's history? Is it seafaring, travel, and trade adventure, perhaps filled with these swashbuckling pirates or wayfarers across the seas? Are you looking at creating a world that's been devastated by a massive natural cataclysm far in the past? Are you looking at cramming a great deal of political intrigue into one small area? Or do you want to give the impression of forces far beyond our understanding shaping the world and its people in superhuman ways? So, once we've had a thought of that, how do we begin sketching our own fantasy maps? Let's break it down step by step. One of the first roadblocks for many fantasy mapmakers is deciding what the land actually looks like. Should you create a single massive continent, a sprawling archipelago, a world dominated by inland seas, or cut through by towering mountain chains? And to answer that, consider the following. Tectonic movement and natural formation are where real-world land masses are shaped by plate tectonics. I've talked about it before and it caused quite the argument in the comments. because continents will drift and clash together and tear apart. And it is a great tool if you want to really submerge yourself in natural forces influencing your world. There are a great number of flow-on effects from plate tectonics if you want to use that. But before you immediately go to the comments and start arguing about it, you don't have to use it. It is simply a tool that you can apply once and follow the effects along. Think about the climate and the biomes when you do create your world. Depending on what the shape of it looks like, ask yourself, does your world rotate? Are there hot and cold areas? Are the poles colder than the tropics? And once you've done that, think about where and how the wind moves, what climate looks like. Are there rain shadows? Are there deserts? Are there monsoon areas? Create bands like we have in our own world of the climates. If you want more information on that, you can check out my video on how to world build with a globe, because using a globe will help you to determine where the bands of various climates are. And lastly, ask yourself about the historical context. Is this world ancient, with these well-worn landscapes and mountains that have been worn down by time? Or is it young, with these dramatic volcanic islands that are still forming? Is the landmass relatively stable, or is it still experiencing these cataclysmic changes? Because sketching the shape is one thing, but understanding why it looks the way it does will make all the difference and allow you to make changes later on. So once you have the idea of your landmass, you need to decide where to place your mountains, your rivers, your other features, because they define not just the geography, but also the civilizations that rise around them. Mountains and highlands tend to form either at the very edges of continents, where the coastline will be jagged, or right in the middle, at the height of the continent. Mountains that are in the middle of the continents will be old. Mountains that are towards the edge of the continent will be young. They form at tectonic boundaries. They act as natural barriers. They split cultures apart and shape trade routes. And kingdoms on different sides of the mountain ranges will experience different climates. They'll have different goods and trade routes. They'll develop differently from each other. Rivers always flow downhill. They start at mountains or high peaks and plateaus, and they move inexorably towards the closest body of water, ideally the ocean, but oftentimes lakes. Also be aware that rivers have different patterns. A straight river that runs without very many bends runs fast and is relatively young. But a river which has many bends and oxbows and snakes and meanders through the countryside is very old, is very flat, and has taken a great deal of time to make that pattern. And then you move on to your coastlines and your islands, and when you're creating them, think also about how they look. Beaches and gentler coastlines are very old. They've been worn away by time. But cliffs and islands and pinnacles are much, much younger. The tide is far more active than the wind is, and will wear away at the coastline much more quickly than the wind will wear away at anything else. Large, calm bays will make for excellent harbors and lead to seafaring nations, but jagged cliffs and stormy coasts will make travel much more difficult and isolate regions from the rest of the world. In real-world history, Greece is a very mountainous area, and the mountains lead directly into the sea. It leads to a lot of jagged coastlines, a lot of cliffs, and it makes a great deal of the coastline difficult to navigate on, which means that things like lighthouse, like ferries and barges and shallower waters provide their own dangers and benefits. Never forget when you're creating the coastlines that islands and islets and land bridges will form themselves naturally. Remember that rivers as well drain into the sea and then continue their path outwards. If you created a river that heads into a bay, then that flow of water will continue even under the surface of the ocean. Over time, that'll widen the mouth of the bay. So a bay that has a very thin mouth is younger, created of harder rock. As a rule of thumb, when sketching out coastlines and mountains and islands, I use a 4 by 2 by 1 rule. For every continent that's 4 times larger than the others, I have 2 offshoots that are less than half the size. And off each of those, I have 3 or 4 others that are even smaller. This creates a sort of a level of randomness, a complexity to the map that makes it more interesting. A jagged coastline has more islands. A smoother coastline has been worn away by time. So once the physical landscape is in place, the next step is deciding where people live and how civilizations develop. We've talked about this a great deal in other episodes, but now because we are just sketching the map out, we just want to think about the broad strokes. If the mountains are in the center of the continent, then your civilizations have a great amount of space, a great deal of space to spread out into. If they're right next to the coastline, then you can cram a large number of landmarks into a smaller area. It means that the space of the kingdom is smaller, but there's more in it. When I'm drawing out a civilization, the first thing I tend to ask myself is, where is the best place, easiest place to live? Those are your largest cities, the ones that can feed themselves and support an enormous population. Once you've decided where those are, ask yourself how people travel between them, because they will attempt to do so. Where do they want to travel to from these large areas? Are there mines? Are there other population hubs? Are there holy sites? Once you've decided what route people would travel to those other areas, you can use those as the basis for making smaller towns. Spread them out slowly as a network. In the most habitable, most fertile areas, you'll have a larger population. As you go through, spread the towns and villages out so that there's about a day's travel between them. And that gives you the beginning. Always ask yourself how fertile or how barren the area is. Because the distribution of resources is the basis for all civilization. A kingdom with abundant farmland might be a dominant agricultural power, but in a mountainous region which is rich in minerals, that can lead to a trading empire, a more powerful empire that relies on combat and forging as its basis. Because those factors will help you to determine where things are located, not just in the map, but in the cultures and the history that arise from it. And you can do this theoretically in any order. If you know that you want a sort of imperial power, one that has a large army, you will require weapons and armor for that army, which means that they need to have mines, which means that they need to have mountains, large veins of materials that they can mine for ore. But it will also mean that they need an enormous amount of food and a large population to support that army, which means that you need mountains, you need wide fertile valleys, and ideally a gentle coastline that they can trade and fish from. And there you have it. The first sketch of your fantasy map is just the beginning of the journey. Like the great maps of history, it will evolve and change as you refine it. Start broad. Let the world take shape. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, because every great map starts with a single sketch. All of my videos are concerned with how to make a map, how to world build, using them as a tool. And quite often I give the advice of how to make the map look better, how to make it look tidier, how to be more useful as a resource that you can give to your players or your readers, or even refer to yourself. When you're creating your world, feel free to be messy. It is an expression of your creativity, and you should therefore be very happy to continue to revise it, but keep some details the same. Build it up deliberately over time. Create a strong foundation and add to it. Don't revise, keep adding. I create sketches like this all the time for the maps that I make on this channel and for commissions. I honestly struggle with choosing what to talk about on this subject because there are so many tidbits and inputs that I've picked up over the years. So I would love to sit down for a long form live stream in the near future. I answer questions and create something in real time so that you can follow along. And if that sounds interesting to you, let me know in the comments below and let me know what you're struggling with or what tips that you have that you would like to share. If you found this helpful, check out the free map download on Patreon. Because this one is a commission, as I mentioned, I have a map of the Northern Kingdoms and the war with Nilfgaard from the Witcher books available on Patreon this week, so you can check that out. If you want to share your own sketches, join the Discord, and if you're looking for a custom fantasy map, I do take commissions. Check out the detail in the description below. Next time, we're going to dive into what to add to your fantasy maps. Until then, keep mapping, keep creating, and as always, happy world building.